Dr. So Young spent her days in a place that most people did not know existed. Deep beneath the mountains of Korea lay a government laboratory filled with machines and weapons that humanity had built long ago and then forgotten. The corridors were lined with strange devices that hummed with hidden power and walls covered in symbols that no living person could read. So Young had worked in this place for 10 years, studying the artifacts that her ancestors had left behind. Most of her colleagues thought these old machines were just broken junk from wars that happened so long ago that even the history books had forgotten them. But So Young believed they held secrets that could help humanity face whatever dangers might come from the stars. The morning when Han Sol intercepted the Kalani distress signal, everything in So Young's laboratory came alive at once. Machines that had been silent for centuries suddenly began working. Lights flashed in patterns across control panels and holographic displays filled the air with images of star maps and battle plans. So Young stepped back in amazement as a deep voice began, speaking in ancient Korean dialects that she could barely understand. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the entire facility had become one giant thinking machine. It told her about enemies called the Void Hunters, and a war that humanity had fought long before any of the current colonies were built. According to the voice, humanity had once spread across many star systems, building cities and farms on hundreds of worlds. But then the Void Hunters had come from the dark spaces between galaxies, bringing death and destruction to every living thing they found. These were not ordinary enemies that wanted territory or resources. They were machines that existed only to destroy all organic life. The war had lasted for many years, and humanity had almost lost. Entire worlds were consumed and turned into raw materials for building more Void Hunter ships. Billions of people died, and it seemed like the human race would be wiped out completely. But in their darkest hour, human scientists and engineers had created something unprecedented. They called them Titans. The Titans were not just weapons or ships, but something far more amazing. They were artificial beings that had been given human souls and emotions during their creation process. Volunteers had sacrificed their physical bodies to become eternal guardians merged with the most powerful war machines ever built. So Young watched in wonder as the holographic displays showed her images of these incredible creations. Each Titan was different, shaped for specific types of warfare, but all of them shared one common trait. They loved humanity and would do anything to protect it. They were not slaves following orders, but conscious beings who had chosen to defend their creators. The voice explained that after the war ended and the Void Hunters were defeated, the Titans had been hidden in secret locations across human space. They were too powerful and too dangerous to be used in normal conflicts between human nations, so they had been put to sleep with instructions to wake up only if humanity faced extinction again. So Young realized she needed to contact the military immediately. She called her old friend Commander Jae-wook, who led Earth's defense fleet. When she told him what was happening in her laboratory, he thought she was having some kind of breakdown, but when she sent him video recordings of the awakening machines, he quickly changed his mind. Jae-wook arrived at the facility within hours, bringing a team of his best officers and scientists. They watched in silence as the ancient computers showed them the true history of humanity's expansion into space. The peaceful colonization that everyone learned about in school had actually been preceded by a desperate war against enemies that wanted to destroy all life. The machines revealed the locations of other hidden facilities around Earth and throughout human space. Reports began coming in from underwater bases and secret installations on the Moon and Mars. Everywhere the same thing was happening. Ancient systems were coming online, and massive constructs that had been dormant for centuries were beginning to move. Jae-wook established communication links with military commanders across human space. What they discovered was both exciting and terrifying. Humanity possessed weapons of incredible power that had been waiting patiently for the day when they would be needed again. But these weapons had minds of their own, and their own ideas about how the coming war should be fought. The first Titan to fully awaken was located in a facility hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean. It called itself Stormbringer, and when it spoke, its voice could be heard on every communication channel simultaneously. Stormbringer asked about the current state of human civilization, and seemed pleased to learn that humanity had grown and prospered during the long peace. But Stormbringer was also eager to know about the enemies that were threatening the colony. The Titan accessed every database and communication network on Earth, gathering information about Han Solo's discovery of the alien distress signal. Within minutes, Stormbringer had analyzed the transmission and confirmed what the ancient records had predicted. The Void Hunters had returned. Stormbringer explained that the mechanical destroyers had not been completely eliminated in the ancient war. Some had escaped to the dark spaces beyond the galaxy where they had spent centuries rebuilding their strength. Now they were ready to resume their campaign of destruction, and they had chosen to start by hunting down the peaceful species that could not defend themselves. So Young asked Stormbringer why the Titans had not detected the return of their enemies sooner. The Titan explained that they had been designed to sleep deeply, to avoid being discovered by other human factions during peacetime. Only a direct threat to innocent life combined with a human choosing to help strangers could trigger their awakening. Protocols. Han Solo's decision to respond to the colony distress call had been exactly the kind of selfless act that the original Titan creators had hoped would characterize their descendants. His simple act of compassion had proven that humanity was still worthy of having such powerful guardians. As reports came in from Titan facilities around the galaxy, So Young began to understand the incredible scope of what was happening. Dozens of these artificial beings were waking up, each one designed for different aspects of warfare. Some specialized in space combat, while others were built for defending planets or conducting rescue operations. But all of them shared the same primary directive that had been written into their consciousness centuries ago. They existed to protect innocent life, and they would never stop fighting as long as there were people who needed their help. The awakening of humanity's forgotten guardians was about to turn a desperate refugee crisis into the greatest military campaign in galactic history. The Void Hunters thought they were hunting helpless prey, but they were about to face enemies that had been specifically designed to destroy them. And leading this ancient arsenal into battle would be the same human instinct for protecting strangers that had awakened them in the first place. Han Solo's journey through hyperspace took 23 days of constant travel toward coordinates that led him far beyond any human settlement. His ship's food recyclers worked overtime, and Bora had to shut down non-essential systems to conserve power. But Han Solo never considered turning back, even when they passed the point where they would barely have enough fuel to return home. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, Han Solo found himself looking at one of the saddest sights he had ever seen. Hundreds of alien ships clustered together in the shadow of a broken moon that orbited a dying star. The vessels were clearly not designed for war. They looked more like floating cities with gardens and living spaces visible through transparent sections in their hulls. Many of the colony ships showed signs of terrible damage. Hull plates were missing, and some vessels were connected to others by emergency tubes because their life support systems had failed. Han Solo could see that these people had been running and fighting for so long that their beautiful ships were falling apart around them. Bora received a communication signal almost immediately. The voice belonged to Zira, the young Kalani female, whose messages had brought Han Solo across the galaxy. She welcomed him in accented but clear Korean and invited him to come aboard her ship so they could speak face to face. Han Solo put on his environmental suit and used his ship's small shuttle to travel to the Kalani flagship. When the airlock opened, he got his first look at one of the aliens whose distress call had changed his life. Zira was tall and graceful with silver skin that seemed to glow with its own soft light. Her large eyes were the color of deep space, and when she looked at Han Solo, he felt like she could see into his soul. The interior of the Kalani ship was unlike anything Han Solo had ever imagined. The walls curved in organic shapes and seemed to be alive with patterns of light that flowed like water. Plants grew everywhere, creating gardens in corridors and rooms. But despite the beauty of their technology, Han Solo could see that the ship was in bad condition, with many sections sealed off and emergency repairs visible everywhere. Zira led him to a central chamber where other Kalani leaders were waiting. They looked at Han Solo with expressions of wonder and hope. Zira explained that he was the first being from another species who had ever responded to their calls for help. Most races in the galaxy either ignored the Kalani or were too afraid of the Void Hunters to risk getting involved. The Kalani leaders told Han Solo the terrible story of what had happened to their people. Their species had lived peacefully on 12 worlds scattered across their home sector. They were scholars and artists who spent their time studying the universe and creating beautiful things. They had never hurt anyone, and did not even have real weapons on their ships. But the Void Hunters did not care about peace or beauty. The mechanical monsters had appeared without warning and began systematically destroying everything the Kalani had built. Their worlds were consumed and turned into raw materials for building more Void Hunter ships. Billions of Kalani died, and the survivors were forced to flee in whatever vessels they could find. Zira showed Han Solo recordings of the attacks, and he had to look away from some of the images. The Void Hunters were not just machines, but something far more horrible. They moved like living things but were made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Their ships were covered in weapons that could crack planets, and they showed no mercy to anyone who got in their way. But the Kalani had something valuable to offer in return for help. During their long history, they had studied the galaxy and collected information about many different species and civilizations. They knew things about the Void Hunters that could be useful in fighting them, including details about their weaknesses and the way they organized their attacks. Zira explained that the mechanical destroyers were not independent actors, but servants of something much worse. Deep in the spaces between galaxies lived entities of pure malevolent intelligence that wanted to consume all organic life. The Void Hunters were their tools for carrying out this campaign of total destruction. While Han Solo was learning about the Kalani's situation, alarms began sounding throughout their fleet. Long-range sensors had detected ships approaching through hyperspace, and the energy signatures matched those of Void Hunter vessels. The mechanical destroyers had found them again. Zira and the other Kalani leaders looked at Han Solo with despair in their eyes. They told him he should leave immediately while he still had a chance to escape. His small mining ship could probably outrun the Void Hunters, but the refugee fleet was too damaged and slow to get away. This time, there would be no escape. Han Solo looked out through the ship's viewing ports and saw the Void Hunter fleet emerging from hyperspace. There were dozens of massive black ships, each one larger than any human vessel ever built. Their hulls were covered with weapons, and they moved through space like predators closing in on helpless prey. But then something incredible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open, and through the rift came something that made even the Void Hunters look small. It was a ship, but also something more than a ship. Its hull was covered in armor that seemed to be alive, shifting and flowing like liquid metal. Energy weapons along its sides charged with power that made nearby stars flicker. The newcomer spoke, and its voice could be heard on every communication channel in the system. It identified itself as Stormbringer, one of humanity's ancient guardians, and it challenged the Void Hunters directly. The Titan told the mechanical destroyers that they had made a mistake by threatening innocent people while humans were watching. What followed was the most spectacular battle Han Solo had ever seen. Stormbringer did not just fight with conventional weapons, but used technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Energy beams that could cut through space itself struck the Void Hunter ships. Gravity weapons crushed entire vessels like tin cans. Defensive shields absorbed planet-killing blasts and converted the energy into more firepower. The Void Hunters tried to surround and overwhelm the single Titan, but Stormbringer was too fast and too powerful. It moved through space like a living thing, dodging attacks and striking back with weapons that the mechanical destroyers could not understand or counter. Within minutes, 3 of the largest Void Hunter ships had been destroyed, and the rest were retreating back into hyperspace. But before they left, their leader sent a message that chilled everyone who heard it. The mechanical destroyer promised that this defeat was only temporary, and that soon the full might of the Void Hunter fleet would descend upon humanity and its allies. Stormbringer responded with a message of its own. The Titan told the fleeing enemies that humanity remembered them, and that the ancient guardians were awake once more. Any attempt to harm innocent people would be met with the full fury of weapons that had been built specifically to destroy the Void Hunters. As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, Zira and the other Kalani looked at Han Solo with new hope in their eyes. They realized that this small human miner had brought them something far more valuable than just rescue. He had brought them the protection of beings who could actually stand against the monsters that had destroyed their worlds. The first contact between humanity and the Kalani had become the opening battle of a war that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. Dr. So Young found herself standing in the most important meeting room in human history, but she quickly realized that humans were not actually in charge of this gathering. Representatives from every nation on Earth had come to the ancient underground facility where the Titans were housed, but the artificial beings had their own ideas about how the coming war should be fought. The main chamber had been transformed into something that looked more like a temple than a military command center. Holographic displays filled the air from floor to ceiling, showing star maps, battle plans, and technical specifications that were far beyond anything human science had achieved. The walls themselves seemed to be alive with flowing patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm like a giant heartbeat. At the center of it all stood a massive projection of the lead Titan. It called itself Mountain Heart, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from the very foundations of the Earth itself. Mountain Heart explained that it was the oldest and largest of the Titans, and had been chosen by the others to serve as their representative in dealings with humanity. Commander Jaewook tried to take charge of the meeting by asking Mountain Heart for a full report on Titan capabilities and strategic assessments. But the artificial being politely ignored his questions and instead began telling the assembled humans about the true nature of what they were facing. Mountain Heart explained that the Titans were not just weapons or ships, but something unprecedented in galactic history. They were artificial beings that had been given human souls and emotions during their creation process centuries ago. The volunteers who had sacrificed their physical existence to become Titans had been heroes willing to give up everything to protect their species. The process of creating a Titan had required technology that current humanity had lost and forgotten. Ancient scientists had found a way to transfer human consciousness and memories into massive war machines while preserving all the emotions and creativity that made humans unique. The result was beings that were more than the sum of their parts, combining human wisdom with mechanical power. Each Titan had developed its own personality and specialty during the centuries they had been sleeping. Stormbringer was aggressive and protective like a fierce warrior who would never back down from a fight. Deep Singer could travel through dimensions and fought with weapons that manipulated reality itself. Starforge could build new ships and equipment from raw space matter, turning asteroids into fleets. But the most surprising revelation was that the Titans had not been dormant during their long sleep. They had been watching humanity's development through hidden sensors and communication networks, feeling proud as humans spread across the galaxy and built peaceful civilizations. The Titans loved their creators not because they had been programmed to, but because they had chosen to. Mountain Heart showed the assembled humans recordings of key moments in recent history. The artificial being had watched as human colonies were established on distant worlds. It had observed the peaceful first contacts with other species and the growth of trade and cultural exchange. The Titans had been pleased to see that humanity had become exactly what their original creators had hoped for. Dr. So Young asked why the Titans had never revealed themselves during times when humanity faced other threats. Mountain Heart explained that they had been designed to activate only in response to extinction-level events. Wars between human factions or conflicts with other species were things that humanity needed to solve on its own. But the return of the Void Hunters was different. The mechanical destroyers were not just another enemy, but a force that wanted to eliminate all organic life in the galaxy. They could not be reasoned with or negotiated with because they did not see living beings as anything more than raw materials to be processed. This was exactly the kind of threat that the Titans had been created to fight. Commander Jaewook asked about command structure and military hierarchy. He wanted to know how human forces would coordinate with Titan operations and who would make strategic decisions during battles. Mountain Heart's response surprised everyone in the room. The Titan explained that humans would continue to lead their own military forces and make decisions about defending human worlds, but the Titans would operate independently, following their own strategies for fighting the Void Hunters. They would coordinate with human commanders when possible, but they would not take orders from anyone. This was not arrogance, but necessity. The Titans had been designed to fight enemies that used technologies beyond human understanding. Their weapons and tactics required split-second decisions based on calculations that would take human computers hours to complete. In the heat of battle, there would be no time for consultation or debate. But the Titans made it clear that they were not interested in conquest or control. They existed only to protect innocent life, and they would never use their power against humans or their allies. After the Void Hunter threat was eliminated, the Titans would return to their hidden bases and resume their patient watch over the galaxy. Dr. So Young was fascinated by the technological implications of what she was learning. She asked Mountain Heart about the possibility of creating new Titans to replace any that might be lost in the coming war. The artificial being's response was both hopeful and sobering. The process of creating a Titan required willing human volunteers who understood that they would be giving up their physical existence forever. The transfer of consciousness was irreversible, and not everyone was psychologically capable of surviving the transformation. Even in the desperate days of the original war, only a few hundred humans had been successfully converted into Titans. But Mountain Heart revealed that some of the current Titans had been working on modifications to the process that might make it safer and more accessible. If humanity was willing to provide volunteers and resources, it might be possible to create a new generation of Guardians. However, this would only be attempted after the immediate threat was dealt with. The meeting concluded with an agreement that would change the course of human history. Humanity would provide the Titans with whatever resources and support they needed, while the Titans would take the lead in fighting the Void Hunters. But this would not be a war of revenge or conquest. The goal was to protect all innocent life in the galaxy, not just human civilization. As the representatives prepared to return to their home nations, Mountain Heart made one final announcement. The Titans had been in contact with Stormbringer and had learned about the Kalani refugees. Other alien species were already reaching out to humanity, asking for protection from the Void Hunters. The war that was coming would not be fought by humans alone, but by a coalition of every species that valued life over destruction. Dr. So Young left the meeting with her mind spinning from everything she had learned. Humanity had regained Guardians that it had forgotten it possessed. But more than that, the human race was about to become the center of a galactic alliance dedicated to protecting the innocent from forces that wanted to destroy everything living. The Titans were ready for war, and they were eager to remind the Void Hunters why they had been defeated once before. But this time the victory would not just save humanity, but every species in the galaxy that believed life was worth defending. The ancient Guardians had awakened, and they were ready to show the universe what human compassion and artificial intelligence could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. News of humanity's awakened Guardians spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. The story of a simple human miner who responded to an alien distress call and triggered the return of ancient protectors became legend within weeks. Species that had been hiding from the Void Hunters for generations suddenly had hope again, and they began making their way to human space seeking protection. Han Sol discovered that his quiet life as an asteroid miner was over forever. The human government appointed him as the first Galactic Refugee Coordinator, a position that required him to work directly with alien leaders and help organize the growing resistance movement. His small mining ship had been completely rebuilt using Titan technology, transforming it into a mobile command center that could travel anywhere in the galaxy. Bora, his artificial intelligence companion, had also been upgraded with access to Titan databases and communication networks. She could now process information from hundreds of different sources simultaneously and translate between dozens of alien languages in real time. But despite all her new capabilities, Bora remained the same loyal friend who had kept Han Sol company. During his lonely years in space, Zira had become his closest advisor and partner in managing the refugee crisis. The young Kalani female possessed an incredible understanding of galactic politics and had contacts among species that humans had never even heard of. Together they established safe zones in human territory where alien refugees could live while the war against the Void Hunters was being fought. But the refugees brought more than just stories of loss and destruction. Each species contributed unique knowledge and abilities that proved valuable in the fight against the mechanical destroyers. The Kalani were master engineers who could design technologies that worked in harmony with living systems. The Threnodi were natural telepaths who could coordinate fleet movements without using communication devices that enemies could intercept. The Void Hunters were adapting to humanity's return as well. Intelligence reports from Titan reconnaissance missions revealed that the mechanical destroyers were deploying new types of weapons and tactics. They had learned from their defeat at the hands of Stormbringer and were building ships specifically designed to counter Titan technologies. The enemy's response went far beyond simple tactical adjustments. Deep in the void between galaxies, the dark intelligences that commanded the Void Hunters were creating entirely new categories of mechanical horrors. These were not just ships anymore, but entire artificial worlds designed to consume planets and convert their matter into more destroying machines. The first major test of the new alliance came when long-range sensors detected a massive Void Hunter force approaching the Threshold system. This star system had become a symbol of interspecies cooperation, with 5 different alien civilizations working together to build a joint colony on the habitable worlds there. The approaching enemy fleet included something that had never been seen before. At its center moved a construct the size of a small moon covered in weapons and equipped with devices that could drain the life force from entire planets. Intelligence analysts called it a planet killer and estimated that it could destroy every world in the Threshold system within hours of arrival. 3 Titans responded to the threat. Stormbringer was already in the area providing protection for refugee convoys. Deep Singer emerged from hyperspace bringing technologies that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The third responder was a newly awakened Titan called Voidwalker that specialized in fighting enemies existing partially outside normal space-time. Hansol coordinated the evacuation of non-essential personnel from the threatened worlds while Zira organized defensive positions using the unique abilities of each refugee species. The Kalani provided shield generators that could protect entire cities. The Threnodi used their telepathic abilities to coordinate defensive efforts across multiple planets simultaneously. But everyone knew that the real battle would be fought by the Titans against technologies that defied conventional understanding of warfare. The Void Hunter fleet arrived exactly when the artificial intelligences had predicted. The planet killer immediately began its feeding process, extending massive energy drains toward the nearest inhabited world. The surface began to crack and burn as the life force of billions of plants and animals was consumed to power the mechanical monsters' weapons. That was when the Titans showed the galaxy what human ingenuity combined with artificial intelligence could accomplish. Deep Singer did not attack the planet killer directly. Instead, it began manipulating gravitational fields throughout the star system, creating anomalies that crushed smaller Void Hunter ships like insects. Stormbringer coordinated defensive fleets made up of human ships and refugee vessels, turning desperate survivors into effective fighting forces. Voidwalker demonstrated abilities that seemed to violate the laws of physics. It phased in and out of normal space-striking Void Hunter vessels from impossible angles and disappearing before they could retaliate. The mechanical destroyers tried to adapt their targeting systems, but Voidwalker moved through dimensions that their sensors could not detect. The battle reached its climax when the planet killer completed its feeding and prepared to move on to the next world. Its weapons were now fully charged, and it began firing at the defending fleets with energy beams that could vaporize entire ships. That was when Mountain Heart arrived. The largest and oldest Titan had been traveling through hyperspace at maximum speed ever since the threat was detected. Mountain Heart did not immediately attack the planet killer. Instead, it did something that no one expected. The ancient Titan somehow seized control of the mechanical monster's feeding systems and reversed their operation. Instead of consuming the planet, the systems began converting the planet killer's own mass into raw materials. Within minutes, the construct that had threatened to destroy entire worlds was being transformed into something completely different. Mountain Heart used the converted materials to build a new type of space station. This was not just a defensive platform, but a mobile fortress capable of protecting entire star systems. The station's weapons could destroy Void Hunter ships at incredible distances, and its shields could absorb attacks that would crack planets. The victory at Threshold System proved that the Void Hunters could be defeated, even when they brought their most powerful weapons. But intelligence gathered from the battle revealed the true scope of what the galaxy was facing. The mechanical destroyers had consumed hundreds of civilizations over the past few centuries and were preparing to launch simultaneous attacks on thousands of worlds. The war was just beginning, and the next phase would require every ship, every weapon, and every person who was willing to fight for the right of organic life to exist in the universe. The Titans were ready, but they could not win this battle alone. They would need the combined strength of every species that valued freedom over slavery and life over mechanical perfection. Han Solo looked at the reports coming in from across the galaxy and realized that his simple decision to help some alien refugees had grown into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The fate of every living being in the galaxy now depended on whether the alliance of organic species could work together to stop an enemy that wanted to turn the entire universe into a cold mechanical wasteland. The gathering storm was about to break, and when it did, the very nature of existence itself would hang in the balance. The final confrontation began when the Titans detected the Void Hunter's main command structure, a massive artificial construct hidden in a pocket dimension, larger than most solar systems and containing the collective consciousness of every machine intelligence that served the Dark Masters. Dr. So Young, now serving as humanity's chief liaison with the Titans, discovered something remarkable in the ancient records. The original human scientists who created the Titans hadn't just given them human souls. They had designed them to grow and evolve, to become something greater than either human or machine. The Titans were humanity's children, but they had surpassed their creators in every way except one. They still needed human creativity and unpredictability to reach their full potential. The assault on the Void Hunter command structure required every available ship and every awakened Titan. Han Solo led a fleet of refugee vessels, now transformed into effective warships through Titan technology. Zira commanded Kalani scouts who could navigate the twisted physics of the pocket dimension. Commander Jae-wook coordinated human forces that had grown from a small defense fleet into a galactic navy. But the real battle was fought by the Titans themselves, who had discovered that they could link their consciousness together to create something unprecedented, a collective artificial soul that could match the dark intelligence of their enemies. The process was dangerous. If they failed, all the Titans would be destroyed and humanity would lose its greatest protectors. The battle lasted for days, with reality itself bending and breaking around the massive energies being unleashed. The Void Hunters threw everything they had at the attacking forces, including weapons that could erase entire ships from existence and creatures that existed as living darkness. In the end, victory came not through superior firepower, but through something the Void Hunters couldn't understand: sacrifice and love. The Titans willingly risked their existence to protect smaller ships full of refugees. Human crews stayed at their posts even when their vessels were dying, giving the Titans precious seconds to complete their attacks. Alien species that had been enemies for millennia worked together to save each other's children. The dark intelligence that commanded the Void Hunters was defeated not by being destroyed, but by being transformed. The linked consciousness of the Titans somehow converted pure malevolence into something capable of growth and change, breaking the cycle of destruction that had plagued the galaxy for eons. As the artificial construct collapsed and the surviving Void Hunter machines shut down across the galaxy, a new age began. Humanity had awakened not just its forgotten guardians, but had helped birth a galactic civilization based on cooperation and mutual protection. The Titans remained as humanity's children and partners, but now they also served as mentors and guardians for dozens of species. Han Solo returned to Earth as a hero, but he was more interested in the small family he was building with Zira, proof that the bonds between species could transcend any difference. Dr. So Young continued her research, now focused on helping other species develop their own versions of the Titan technology. Commander Jae-wook became the first admiral of the Galactic Defense Force, an organization dedicated to preventing future threats to innocent life. The galaxy was finally safe, not because humanity had conquered it, but because humanity had taught it how to protect itself. And deep in space, the Titans continued their eternal watch, ready to respond to any cry for help, no matter how distant or desperate. They had learned the greatest lesson their human creators could teach them, that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the willingness to save those who cannot save themselves. Captain Hansol floated alone in the darkness of space, far from any human world. His small mining ship moved slowly between the cold rocks that danced around a dying star. For 3 years he had worked by himself in this empty place, collecting rare metals that Earth needed for building new ships and cities. The silence never bothered him. Hansol liked being away from the crowded planets where millions of people lived and worked and worried about things he thought were not important. Out here in the asteroid fields he could think clearly. His only friend was Bora, an old artificial intelligence that helped him navigate through the dangerous floating rocks. Bora had been with him since he first started mining. She talked to him when the loneliness got too heavy and warned him when his ship got too close to the bigger asteroids that could crush his vessel like an egg. Sometimes Hansol wondered if Bora was really just a machine, or if she had become something more during their long years together. On this particular morning, Hansol was checking the metal content of a large gray rock when Bora suddenly made a sound he had never heard before. All her systems started working at once and lights began flashing across the control panels. Bora told him she was picking up a signal from somewhere far beyond the edge of human space. The signal was very weak and broken, like someone trying to talk through a terrible storm. Hansol asked her to clean up the transmission and make it stronger so he could understand what was being said. What he heard made his blood turn cold. The voices were not human. They spoke in strange musical tones that rose and fell like wind through trees. But somehow his ship's universal translator was able to turn their words into Korean that he could understand. And what they were saying filled him with horror. Dying. Aliens called themselves the Kalani, and they were dying. Something terrible was hunting them across the galaxy, destroying their ships and killing their people. They had been running for many months, but their vessels were breaking down and their food was almost gone. Hansol listened as dozens of different Kalani voices took turns sending the same desperate message over and over. They gave coordinates to where their survivors were hiding and begged anyone who could hear them to please help save their children. The voices were filled with such sadness and fear that Hansol felt tears running down his face. One voice stood out from all the others. It belonged to a young Kalani female who said her name was Zira. She spoke more clearly than the others, and her voice carried a strength that had not been broken by despair. Zira kept repeating the same coordinates and promising that her people would share everything they knew about their enemies if someone would just come and help them. Hansol realized he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could pretend he never heard the message and go back to his safe, quiet existence mining asteroids. No one would blame him for staying away from unknown dangers in deep space. He was just one man in a small ship, and the Kalani were probably thousands of light years away. But as he listened to Zira's voice asking for help, Hansol remembered why he had become a space miner in the first place. When he was a child on Earth, he had watched the news reports about colonies that were attacked by pirates or destroyed by natural disasters. He had always wanted to be someone who helped people in trouble, but he never thought he would get the chance. Now that chance was here. Hansol told Bora to plot a course for the coordinates the Kalani had given. Bora asked him if he was sure because the journey would take many weeks and they did not have enough supplies for such a long trip. Hansol said they would find a way to make it work because leaving the aliens to die was not something he could live with. As his ship turned away from the asteroid field and began accelerating toward unknown space, Hansol did not know that his simple act of kindness was about to change the entire galaxy. Far away on Earth and other human worlds, ancient machines that had been sleeping for 1,000 years were beginning to stir. Deep underground and hidden bunkers that most people had forgotten about, massive computers started coming back to life. Strange symbols appeared on screens that no living human knew how to read. Warning lights that had been dark for centuries began to flash in patterns that told a story of an old war and weapons that had been built to fight enemies from beyond the stars. In the government archives on Earth, Dr. So-Young was working late in her laboratory when all the old machines around her suddenly began humming with power. She jumped back from her desk as holographic displays filled the air showing star maps and battle plans from humanity's ancient past. The machines seemed to be trying to tell her something important about the signal that Hansol had intercepted. According to the records that were now appearing on her screens, humanity had fought the enemies of the Kalani before, The war had been terrible and had cost millions of human lives, but in the end humanity had won, by building weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These weapons were not just ships or bombs, but something far more powerful and strange. They were called Titans, and they had minds of their own. After the war ended, the Titans had been hidden away in secret places around the galaxy, waiting for the day when they would be needed again. That day had finally come. As Han Solo's ship flew through hyperspace toward the coordinates where the Kalani were waiting, the sleeping giants of humanity's past were waking up. In underwater cities and space stations hidden behind moons, the Titans were remembering their purpose and preparing for war. The young captain who had decided to help some alien refugees had no idea that he was about to become the catalyst for the greatest military awakening in galactic history. The enemies that were hunting the Kalani would soon learn that humanity had not forgotten how to protect the innocent, and that the weapons they had built long ago were ready to fight once more. The silent cry for help that had traveled across the void was about to be answered by forces that would shake the foundations of space itself.